What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai Today Morning here, bringing another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Kamen Rider Build episode 30. This episode is called The Truth About Pandora's Box. And we get to learn some very important stuff, not only about Pandora's Box, but also about some other characters that we've known about for quite some time. These are all major characters that we've been seeing for a long time, and one character in particular we learned some very important stuff about, and then there are other characters that now we have better ideas about certain things regarding their origins and their abilities and other things of that sort that are kind of uncovered this episode, and it really just changes the whole perspective of those characters because of this new information. It doesn't mean that like what we know in the past is erased, like, you know, it doesn't matter anymore, but it kind of adds to it, you know what I mean? And we'll get into that throughout this episode because there are several different points that kind of hint to that, additive point or whatever. So let's get started. I said before, the episode is called The Truth of Pandora's Box, and what we end up seeing is the beginning of the episode. In the previous episode, we ended up seeing that Vernage, the Queen of Mars, took over Mizora, and the spirit, as we know, is trapped in the bangle that Mizora wears. So what actually ends up happening is that as Vernage is unveiled and everything, eventually Bloodstark responds with saying, "I thought that wait, she's alive." Like, he was surprised that she was alive. I forget the exact wording that he said, but he said something about how he was surprised that she was alive. And the thing is that I'm kind of curious as to what that really means. Now, as we know, Suichi went to Mars. Now, of course, could it have been that when Suichi went to Mars and the Pandora's box was activated and it destroyed the civilization, that he expected her to have, you know, died with the Martian civilization? Maybe. But what it could have also been was that he may have fought her, or something else may have happened that may have led to her supposed destruction. And the reason why I say that also is because we later on learn about that she has no body. As we know, she only has the spirit of herself, or the soul in her, so her body clearly is diminished, but her soul still exists in this bangle that Mizora wears. So that's very important. So what does end up happening is that as Bloodstark tries to attack a little bit, eventually Mizora, as Vernage, ends up using her special abilities to kind of lift Bloodstark up and toss him a huge distance away. And when that ends up happening is that he realizes, I guess that's all I can do. Basically implying that the Queen of Mars is way stronger than he is right now. Now, does that mean that he can't get stronger? Of course he can get stronger. Though at the same time, it is an interesting thing to note. And he does end up de-transforming at that point. So from here, what we do end up seeing is that he ends up trying to use his other Martian abilities, conjuring up some sort of dark energy or something like that. And what does end up happening is that he uses that dark energy to try to attack Mizora as Vernage. And what actually ends up happening is that Ryoga ends up blocking the attack, and it leads to what we assume to be the destruction of the Cross-Z Charge power-up form for at least now. Now, does that mean that it will never return again? It's unclear. As far as things go, we do know that it is destroyed, or it's damaged pretty badly to the point that he can't use it, at least for now. And it's not a problem because what he'll be getting will be a very powerful power-up form in the next episode, although he does get to use it this episode as a weapon. So it's very important to keep in mind. So he basically only has the Cross-Z mode right now at this current moment. But what does end up happening is that when they head back to the cafe, they discuss things, they end up speaking to Vernage, and Vernage explains some very important stuff about the Pandora's box. What we end up learning about the Pandora's box is the fact that that apparently it was used by a being called Evol, and Evol is spelled E-V-O-L. Yeah, E-V-O-L. Although there are certain spellings that I've seen before where they'll have it with a T at the end, so it would be E-V-O-L-T, which I guess it sounds probably a little bit more proper because Evolt. But at the same time, saying, and I think it's also because people will get confused if you call it evol, because it would sound like you're saying evil when it's not evil, it's evol. Keep it in mind. I know I'm going on and on about this point, but I just want to make it clear for all those that are wondering, is it evil? Is it evolt? You can call it either way. I'm going to call it evol, but if you want to call it evolt, that's fine too. It does happen a lot of times. It's all about the translation. I've seen it more often than not where it's evol, but you can do it either way. I'm not going to judge you, and it's up to you as to how you refer to it. So anyway, what does end up happening from here is that it's explained that Evil was ended up using the Pandora's box to destroy the Martian civilization and all that, and we also end up learning about the fact that her body was destroyed and all she has is the soul, and she's not going to be able to last that long. So the power that she has is very limited, and that's very important to remember. Though obviously she's lived on Earth for quite a few years in Mizora's body, so clearly she's been able to preserve her strength for quite some time, and that's a very interesting thing to keep in mind. She's saying that she doesn't have all that long to exist, yet at the same time she's been around for several years, although I guess she hasn't used her powers up until now because she hasn't really had to. She's mainly only used it for purifying bottles, so that's very interesting to consider, of course. So what we do end up seeing from here is that eventually Mizora does end up falling to sleep. We also, by the way, prior to that, end up seeing that Vernage mentions how Ryoga is someone that's supposed to bring hope and is supposed to be very important, and that's a very interesting thing. He just kind of thinks of himself as just himself. Yet in reality, there's more to him than we know. So what does end up happening is that while Mizora is sleeping, the others end up discussing different things regarding how, for example, Ryoga has the greatest hazard level. He started off later than any of them did, pretty much, and yet he still has the greatest hazard level out of any of them, and he gained it very, very quickly. So there's a lot more to him, and this can't just be a coincidence. That's what they think. There has to be something more to him that's allowing him to get so powerful and be in the state that he is. So at that point, what they do end up discussing is that Sawa is going to go and find some information on Ryoga to learn more about his origins. What we do learn is that Ryoga lost his parents. His parents died. He doesn't remember all the details about how they died, but he just knows that they died. And the thing is that he was a kid at the time, so he really doesn't remember a whole lot, which is also very important because Mizora was fairly young when that whole incident happened. So, again, it's not the exact same length of time, but it's an interesting connection that you can obviously draw between the two, and that's kind of an interesting thing to consider, of course. That aspect of it. So what we do end up knowing from here is that they're going to work on a power up for Ryoga because Ryoga can't use his charge mode right now. So instead they end up discovering that Ryoga is kind of carrying this like rock formation, like this kind of weird rock in his hand, and what ends up happening is that as he's holding onto it, it suddenly begins to release heat and magma and energy, and then eventually the rock formation disintegrates, but then it releases a bottle that's completely like darkened, and it's a very unique bottle that kind of gives him the hint as to what power-up form he should be looking to get, which is related to magma, because the form that he's supposed to be getting is called Kamen Rider Cross Z Magma, and so it kind of fits with it because he has like these volcanic abilities and all that. So that's kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind. So in the meantime, what we do end up seeing is that with the villain base, there's discussions that occur between Suichi and also Namba as the prime minister, and how Vernage is very powerful, but her power doesn't last forever, but they have to be mindful of her strength, and there's all these other factors that are brought up. They also end up discussing that there's also points that are brought up, such as how eventually in the Pandora Tower, the two Washio Bros are told to secure the Pandora Tower to make sure that no one gets in and tries to attack it or destroys it or anything like that. So that's very interesting to consider, of course. What we do end up seeing as well is that eventually Misora does wake up after having a brief like flashback image of someone calling out for Evol, and that's kind of important to remember. And what does end up happening from here is that Sento decides to leave. Like, he ends up, saying that we managed to make the power-up device and everything's good in that way. And then at that point, Sento goes with Ryoga and Kazumi to head to the Pandora's Tower. And what we end up seeing... Actually, no. That's not right. No. What does end up happening is that all continues. They end up talking to Misora. Eventually, there is a point where Sento ends up going out and leaving everyone because he is actually called out for doing something out of treason. If you remember in the previous episode, he ended up taking $1 from the Prime Minister. And the reason why that's important is because when he gets revived, is when Misora comes back too, there's a conversation that occurs about Misora and how, like, he wants to get the Pandora's box, but the thing is that if he invades, then that could lead to big problems with the government and everything. So what does end up happening is that he ends up getting considered, like, not on the same grounds with Totoro anymore, like where he's against them because he steals $1 in the previous episode, and by doing that, what happens is that he's not associated with the armies or anything. So, like, if he does something, he's not going to be referred to as causing a war, you know what I mean? Like, he's on his own in this case. So that's his way of getting into it without actually creating war between nations, which is a smart and interesting tactic, though it's obviously a very dangerous one because without the military forces, he does have a decreased advantage because there's no one that's really backing him up as much, and he decides to go initially by himself. Though shortly after this, what we do end up seeing is that Sento ends up going on his bike. He rides into the city. There's several hard guardians nearby. He ends up transforming into the rabbit tank mode, just the standard one, riding all around, trying to do several attacks against the hard guardians. And eventually the hard guardians form the big sentries that they've shown before, but in this case it's the hard guardian variation of that. So it's like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, it's really crazy. So what does end up happening is that eventually Sento is met by Ryoga and Kazumi, and they both say, like, you decided to steal $1 and do all this stuff, like, without us. And the thing is that they basically say, like, we're in this together. Like, I know what you're, like, we understand what you're trying to do, but, like, Misora was upset and we're not happy about this. Work with us. And, like, basically, Sento's kind of the guy where he wants to be the hero, and he always does this, like, fourth wall break kind of thing about always trying to be, like, the guy and being number one and all that. And, it's good, but it's also kind of nice that they kind of go off of that and go against his way of doing things. And I'm saying that for mainly Ryoga, though Kazumi in this episode definitely did that too. So that's very important. So what does end up happening from here is that the three of them end up doing a rider kick. They jump really high in the air and they do 3 rider kicks, one from each of them, and they end up destroying the sentries and then jump right into a certain area in the Pandora's Tower where they manage to fall there with their legs in a kick position. And then following this, we end up seeing that the ground base layer that's in the room suddenly begins to form 3 boxes that are very tall. And eventually these 3 boxes go from being boxes to then, like, transforming. And then it's shown to be that on the 2 sides are 2 hard guardians. And then in the middle, there are the Washio Bros. So at that point, what we end up seeing is that Sento, Kazumi, and Ryoga end up fighting all 4 of these characters at once. We do end up seeing several different attack sequences. We see Ryoga actually going up against the Hard Guardians while the other 2 go up against the Washio Bros, which are the Engine Bro and the Remote Control Bro, and that's very cool to see as well. We also get to see Sento give Ryoga the Magma Knuckle, which will be his power-up device that he'll be getting for next week's power-up mode. So he uses that this episode not to transform because he can't for some reason. So instead, he decides to actually use it as a weapon, which at first it doesn't really do much damage to the Hard Guardians. But then when he really figures out how to do it, I mean, he manages to like knock enemies away with like insane force. In the meantime, we also see that Sento gets to use the rabbit mode in this episode, which is very cool. And, this fight just continues to get even more intense. Now, one thing I forgot to also mention, right before they actually arrive into the Pandora's Tower, we end up seeing that apparently, first of all, that Gintaku is, like, his fate is determined by, his actions, and the thing is that like Saito has control over that stuff, so like if he screws up or if he does something wrong, he could lead to himself being destroyed or something bad really happening to him. So that's very important to obviously take into consideration. Also, what we end up seeing is that apparently Bloodstark, or Suichi as we know him, is kind of actually split. So this whole entire time we've been thinking that the voice transformation thing, how when they end up using the steam guns, they have a different voice that they use when they're using the steam guns or whatever. So in this case, what we actually see is that apparently in Suichi's case, he actually does have this other voice, but that's not his. It's actually some spirit or something. That's what it sounds like, because on one half of his face, he ends up speaking like himself, and then the other half of his face at one point, he ends up speaking with the Bloodstark voice, which is very interesting, because what that kind of implies is that, like Mizora with her bangle, he is embodied by a secondary spirit, which makes me kind of suspect, and this is my suspicion, he is probably meant to be evil. He's like that spirit form, that evil form that it's in him. And we've known for a while that, Bloodstark has not been a good guy. He's always betrayed everyone, and he has like some bigger motive in mind. What I'm pretty sure of is that dark form is probably evil, and that his good form is trying to fight against him. Though, as we've seen so far, he's mainly been on the side of evil. We haven't seen much good in him, although there have been the occasions here and there. So that's very important to consider. And also, if you look at Kamen Rider Evil's design, which I might show a link or an image here, depends on what I decide to do. I don't know yet. But if you look at the designs of the two, there is a similarity. They're not the same, of course, but in other words, Evil looks like a more powered up form of what Bloodstark looks like, which is cool. And I like that aspect of it. I think it's a really cool concept. What we do end up seeing as well is that, eventually he ends up using the Pandora's box to kind of manipulate the room that Sento and the others are in, to kind of trap them into different encasings and kind of lead to the walls smashing them and beating them around and doing all sorts of things. So he has like all these manipulative abilities that he ends up using. We also end up learning that eventually Mizora ends up discussing with Sawa that apparently Ryoga is not a human. That's very important. And what I'm suspecting is, as we know before, he's not like everyone else. He's supposed to be this hope or this amazing heroic figure. And the thing is that what I'm expecting is that he probably was like maybe a prince or someone that was on the side of good in Mars. Just a suspicion, but like a heroic figure from Mars that somehow ended up having his body put into Ryoga. Now, we don't know all the details, and what we do end up seeing is in the preview clip, it's mentioned that apparently Bloodstark had this plan to kind of continuously power up Ryoga for some bigger reason. Now, we don't know the exact reason as to why he was doing it. There's obviously more to it than just that, and maybe I'm right about the prince or something having to do with Mars, because I feel like he probably, if he's not human, he's a Martian. That's what I would kind of expect. But we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, next episode we'll get to see the Kamen Rider Kamen Rider Cross Z Magma form. And we'll also get to learn more about Bloodstark, I'm sure, and we'll get to learn more about Ryoga, which will be very, very good to know, because those two characters in particular got a lot of focus, though obviously Vernage or Mizora got more information, because now we end up understanding about, the powers that she has, and about the fact that she's been using it little by little by purifying these bottles and everything, and it's kind of like a good bad situation, but it's an interesting situation overall. I love to know your guys' opinions. I know this episode was a little bit longer. Overall, I would say I liked it a lot. I definitely want to know you guys' opinions. What did you guys think of this episode? 30 episodes in now, so we are probably about 60% or so into this show, which is pretty good overall. And I hope you guys enjoy this video, so please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.